Welcome back everyone, Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to do sort of a follow-up to a video I had done previously, which I was talking about predicting which countries are going to be dramatically better in 10 years, which ones are likely to be worse in 10 years. And we got some interesting responses from you guys. I shared some of my thoughts. The thing I think that's interesting about that is to ask the question of, okay, if I kind of project this, either before I project it or after I project it, and kind of work it backwards, what are the factors that cause a place to be successful? And so today I'm going to explore the subject of what it is that, in my view, made the US successful. Because, basically Warren Buffett is famous for saying, if you'd bet against the US from 1776 until whenever, that was a bad bet. And that's largely been true. I'll cover a little bit of some details that I'd looked up previously. But I think it helps you to think about what places will be successful in the future and why. So I'm going to dive into that. Before we do, though, I would love to hear from you guys. What would you say are the factors that made the US successful? I'm sure there's lots of different ideas out there, and some of them I'm probably going to avoid. They're maybe kind of the Jared Diamond type thinking, which I think probably has some merit, but I'm going to cover two in particular. But I'd love to hear what you guys think as your reasons. So before we do that, though, if you haven't already, really appreciate you subscribing. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Please smash the notification bell. Check out our videos. We try to produce great content for you every single day. There's like a huge archive of stuff that you can go and check out that we've put out so far. And if you're interested at all in help with where to relocate, how to set yourself up internationally, how to pay the lowest legal amount of tax possible, how to protect your assets, getting residencies, citizenships, unofficial citizenships, forming companies, opening bank accounts, etc., please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or you can check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com. Let's dive into it. All right. So I was having a conversation with a lawyer who we do some business with in the US today, and he made this interesting comment. We were talking about kind of the flood of people expatriating, and it's interesting in one of my videos, I was talking about the rising numbers, and someone in the comments had said, well, the numbers actually aren't rising, and kind of pointed out some really interesting things about kind of the delayed reporting, et cetera. But certainly anecdotally, and he just kind of said the same thing, is that the numbers have been steadily rising, and since the US elections, they have been exploding, like a lot more people. I know people talk every election cycle, it seems like, about saying, oh, if this person gets elected, I'm going to renounce, I'm leaving, I'm going to Canada, I'm whatever. And this time it seems to be very, very real in a lot higher numbers than certainly I've ever seen before. So we'll see how the numbers are when they kind of officially come in, but anecdotally, they seem pretty high. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that Warren Buffett has said it was a mistake to bet against the US since 1776. And I first heard him say this maybe like not 10 years ago, but maybe like 8 years ago or something like that. And at the time I thought to myself, is that true? Like, is that outdated information? I did a video recently on updating your beliefs, right? And so just because it has been true for 100 years or 200 years doesn't mean that it has to be true today. And I decided to look up the GDP growth numbers, right? So how much has GDP grown year over year over time? And the shocking thing, if you look from, say, 1990 and then from 2000, is actually the US has performed pretty well in GDP growth rate. There are some countries that have outperformed it. China has just, blown everybody away. Ireland has done well. Singapore has done well. There's a few that have done well. But generally speaking, the US has done pretty well. Now, you could say, well, the distribution has been off. You've had this kind of increasing bifurcation of rich and poor. You can make those types of arguments, but broadly, something is working or has been working, right? So the question is that going to continue? And what are the leading indicators to think about that? Because of course, there's going to be lagging indicators, right? There's going to be, in retrospect, you'll look and you'll say, oh, this has happened. But trying to predict the trajectory of some place, it's interesting to look. And this applies not just to the US, but to many other places. So I have a theory of why it is that the US has done really well, and I'm going to put that forward to you. But again, I would love to hear what you guys have to say. And I think a lot about the human capital side of it, okay? At the end of the day, the people who go there, as well as kind of the systems around those people, so the incentive structures, the enablers, et cetera, are, I think, the principal driver behind a place. And you might argue, hey, listen, well, there's geography, they have two oceans, they have a peaceful neighbor to the north, relative stability to the south. never been invaded. These things are all true, right? You have lots of natural resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's plenty of things that are, positive there that have been certainly responsible, that give an advantage over, say, Europe, which has had 2 world wars in the last year, or in the last century. There's a lot of kind of turmoil that has happened in there. There's a lot less natural resources. It's more difficult to access water, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality of this is Andorra does better than Spain, right? Switzerland does better than many of the surrounding countries. Singapore does better than all the surrounding countries, right? So you can find these places that they do pretty well. And I just named some places that were, pretty small. But then you can go and you can look at China, right? China did really poorly for a long time and now has done really well. So it obviously wasn't the resources that changed, right? You could go and look at, Brazil has a lot of, some of the same natural advantages one would think would exist in some other places, but hasn't done so well. Mexico, same thing, right? So what is it? I think that there's a large component about the people. And so let's think about that. I think that fundamentally if you're in an environment where you have an influx of good people, that's a good thing. And if you retain good people, that's a good thing. So one of the things I've talked about on this channel before is an indicator that I use when working with clients and helping to kind of advise people, et cetera, is I pay attention not just to where people go, but to where people stay. Because there's a lot of places that on the surface sound good and people go there and then they end up leaving. It's like, well, something's wrong with that place, right? So the US, it turns out, has been really, really good at attracting a lot of great people. We can see, from Nikola Tesla, right? Born in, Yugoslavia area, goes to school, I think in Budapest, then ends up going to the US, right? You can see lots of examples like this. You can see great engineers, great physicists, you can see great industrialists, and so on and so forth. People who have moved over from Europe to come to the US. Now you see an influx of people from some of the other places, right? You see a lot of Asian people coming over. You can look at the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, right? East Indian background. You can see Chamath Palihapitiya, right? Has a Sri Lankan background. You can see Elon Musk, South African background, so on and so forth. Like, why didn't Elon Musk stay in South Africa? Why didn't he stay in Canada? Why did he go on to there? So obviously something has worked to attract that talent. And the theory that I'm going to propose to you is that 2 key factors played a role in this success. The first is selection bias. Okay? I think people underestimate selection bias. And this was one of the things that this lawyer was commenting on that I thought was very astute. He said, unfortunately, most of the people who are renouncing their US citizenship are producers. These are people who make things. These are people who do things in the world. These are the exact wrong people that you want to lose. Okay? As a country, you should kind of be measuring yourself by who is it that I'm attracting and who is it I'm losing. If I'm losing the best and brightest, that's a bad thing. This is like an Atlas Shrugged moment, right? You have basically all the great heroic creators in the world leaving, and you have the wrong people coming to fill them in. Now, of course, there's plenty of good people still coming in, but you kind of build a brand. I think somebody commented in one of our posts something, I think it was a Milton Friedman quote about if you have a welfare state, you need to be really careful about who you let in, because who are you attracting, right? You're attracting people, or even if you're not attracting that type of people, you're going to end up in a situation where they can take advantage of you. So you have to do that. Versus if you're in another place where you disincentivize that, well, there's the incentives, right? So here's the reality. Generally speaking, immigrants in general are a good selection bias. People who leave their country to go to another country, that is a powerful selection bias. You're talking about a group of people who are willing to undergo a certain degree of hardship, because it is not a comfortable, easy thing. Here we talk about relocating and going abroad. Like, the truth is, even today when it's pretty good, right? I can jump on a plane, I can be somewhere in 8 hours, I can, go and get out my cell phone and have Google to tell me how to go. I can translate with Google Translate, so on and so forth. Like, it's pretty easy today, right? That is still a lot more difficult, a lot more uncomfortable than staying at home in your home country in your own environment. So that group of people have to be really motivated, right? These are people who are automatically predisposed to be motivated to get up and do something with their life, which is maybe one reason why shutting off to immigrants is not actually a great idea, right? It's a whole other conversation. So the people who are leaving, these are people who, like, they're going to make their lives better, right? They have a motivation, they're gonna get out, they're gonna do that. And so you had a whole country of people created like that in the US, right? Yeah, you did in Canada, you had in Australia, some other places as well, of course. Interestingly, those are all countries that tend to mostly be doing pretty well, right? If you were to rank some of the top 10 countries or whatever, you'd probably throw Canada, Australia, US, New Zealand, probably all of those places would end up on your list of really good places. And what's one of the things that they have in common? Well, they're largely populated by former immigrant populations, right? So very interesting in that regard. The second thing that I think goes along with that, and this is very, very important in my opinion, is that throughout most of the US's history, there was a lack of good competition. So the thing was, if you wanted what was in the US, right, where would you go? Where would you go for that? You want freedom, you want an opportunity where you can make your own, where you can grab land, where you can, do these sorts of things. Where would you go for that? Mostly that wasn't available in Europe, which was, typically quite feudal, right? You wouldn't have that typically in Asia. You wouldn't have that typically in Africa, and increasingly you kind of had this group of people who came in and they built it, they made it better and better and better and better. And then you have, the wars come in and, cause a lot of damage to places like Europe, etc. And so, while these things are war is just inherently bad, right? So it's going to destroy things, push things back. Here you don't have that. So, things are getting better. And so in a competitive landscape, where would you rather be? I can tell you, I spent lots of time in Eastern Europe. Like Eastern Europe, you can just go and look at the buildings. They're more broken down. They're less like, they're not like you get in Dubai, right? They're not like you're going to get in, a bunch of Singapore or something like that, right? These new, modern, this is attractive to a certain group of people. And so why do I bring this up? I bring this up because I think that's changing. I think that it's highly underestimated how much these other places have gotten a lot better. If you look, Poland's a great example. I had a friend sending me some video the other day from Warsaw. It was Warsaw. And it's like he's sitting in this place and it's remarkably great, right? I recommended a video the other day, Red Notice, where the author was talking about, going right after the fall of communism into Poland for investing in consulting and things like this. And just like how horrible it was, right? Just terrible. Well, Poland has gotten way, way better. So if you were to compare Poland in 1990 to Poland in 2020, you're talking about a vast difference. And so what's happening is the gap between these supposedly great places, Canada, the US, Australia, etc., and these places that were traditionally not so attractive, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, the Middle East, etc., has been closing to the point where now some of these places are better, right? And all of a sudden, it's like, what does this do to your flow of people? Over time, this means all of a sudden that's going to shift. It's going to flip. Now, there's certain things that, say, places like the US still have better than some of these other places, right? There's still certain types of freedom and structure, etc., that they're probably the best in the world at, right? But on the flip side, and unfortunately, probably like a smart country would appeal to that. They would say, hang on, who can we target? And let's go after that as our target market and attract, the people who really value these things and kind of appealing. And I think to some extent, maybe Georgia is one of the best examples of a country that's kind of started to do that. I don't think they kind of had the continuation with their government, but previous government certainly made some real meaningful progress in the direction, which is why kind of in terms of economic freedom indexes, they rank quite high. So you've got that thing, and that thing, you can just see the results, right? You can see the people who are drawn to places like Georgia. You can see the type of people who are drawn to places like Malaysia, to places like Singapore, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's really worth thinking about. What are the places that attract builders? What are the places that retain builders? Because that, over a long period of time, is going to have a really, really, really meaningful effect. So anyway, I hope that helps. If you have thoughts, please tell me in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.